on reviewing the change in the concept of autism from the 1980s to the present day. So the next major change has been from rare to common. And that kind of ties in with the first bit for narrative broad as well, because if you broaden a concept, you're obviously going to find it becomes increasingly common. And that's actually quite common in psychiatry anyway. Most psychiatric conditions start out very narrow, and they get more common as time goes on, just because they start to realise that actually it's a lot broader, you know. Yeah, that's kind of the usual trajectory of most psychiatric conditions. So from rare to more common, the first autism prevalence estimate in around 1966 was 4 in 10,000. And then more recently, in 2012, that's changed to about 62 in 10,000. A figure of 1 in 100 is now widely accepted. So that's quite a massive difference. There was a wide spread sense in the 1980s that autism was underdiagnosed. But today, some have suggested that it's overdiagnosed. For example, Gilbert reported an increase in levels of Gilbert reported no increase in levels of parent-reported autistic traits at 9 or 12 years old in a Swedish population-based sample of children born from 1993 to 2003, but a significant increase in rates of autism diagnosis over this 10-year period. They also found a decrease in level of parent-reported autism symptoms for children receiving an autism diagnosis aged 7 to 13 years over the period 2004 to 2014. So that's interesting, because surely you would have thought if a child is going for diagnosis assessment, you would normally assume that the parents would notice something not quite right. That's to say that parents would report autism symptoms, even if the parents themselves are not educated in autism. You would expect parents to be noticing symptoms of autism in a child who is autistic. Indeed, my parents did. Before they knew about autism, they noticed all the things associated with autism. It's just at that point in time, they didn't have the knowledge. Bearing in mind, this was in the 1990s when we didn't have the knowledge of autism like we do now, and that's before the internet and so on. I'm just going to turn on this light over here. So this is interesting, and it makes you wonder, you know. But anyway, that's a different debate. So, the question, and then there's a question here: is autism still underdiagnosed in females? Question mark. Because the rule of thumb in the 1980s was that females might be more rarely affected, but when they were affected, they were hit harder. And this was because of the hypothesis of a female protective effect. So some aspect of biology that meant females required a higher etiological load in order to manifest autism. Siblings, male or female, of autistic girls show higher rates of autistic traits or diagnosed autism than siblings of autistic boys. Suggesting, you know, that there's more kind of weight going on here, you know. But another explanation is that poor recognition of autism in females with good language and IQ, poor recognition of autism in females with good language or IQ. Older estimates of male-female ratios were largely based on numbers from clinical or special education needs registers. More recent studies with epidemiological samples find a lower male preponderance. If current diagnosis criteria is male-based, the ratio may still be inflated. Females require higher symptom expression for a diagnosis than males. And research has often excluded female participants. This research forms the basis for diagnosis criteria, so that becomes very circular. Number two, another possible reason is the bias to think of autism as male. You know, this idea that autism can't occur in women or girls. Number three, it just may look different in females. Personally, I think the number three may look different in females is over-egged. I don't actually think autism does look significantly different in females, other than the fact that obviously you're going to find autistic females might have slightly different interests just because of the way girls and women are socialised. Obviously, yeah, it might be more interested in things like dolls when they're growing up, you know, on average, and maybe people might not expect that in autism because of this male idea about how autism should look. But other than that, I don't really think it does look really that different in females, personally. Little research to tell us how autism looks different, in part because of reliance diagnostic samples to meet the current criteria. People like me. Empirical research is needed to identify if the current diagnostic criteria are gender fair. Until they are, it says, it's important to avoid circularity of including only volunteers with existing diagnosis. and that population-based samples are needed. So the next point in changes in autism concept, number 3, is from childhood to lifespan. So, for descriptions of highly intelligent Asperger adults led to a new phenomenon. Parents of recently diagnosed autistic children would then recognise autism in themselves. So this is part of the explanation as to why we started to see a sort of more lifespan approach as opposed to just focusing on children. In the past, by the way, it was very much seen as a childhood disorder, childhood autism, infantile autism, affecting those very, very profound intellectual disabilities who were then often just shunted off into institutions, never seen again. So there's this idea that, autism doesn't exist in adults. Of course it does, it's just that you didn't really see them. They weren't in the sort of public domain. And of course people at the more Asperger's end, obviously that wasn't known about in the past as well, so there wasn't a name for it. So this just led to the idea that autism was a childhood thing. The emphasis was on childhood. It wasn't until quite recently it was understood that obviously autism is a lifelong condition and these people are still around into adulthood. So that's changed. So number 4, the other change has been from discrete to two-dimensional. Early research focused on identifying the unique features distinguishing autism from other disorders. More recently, the idea of a spectrum, the idea that autism is heterogeneous and continuous, the notion that autism has a behavioural dimension. There's a notion that autism's behavioural dimension might extend beyond autism is a recent idea. And there's increasing interest in the characteristics of first-degree relatives, but it wasn't until the end of the 20th century that these subclinical traits were measured. A further extension of a broad autism phenotype beyond those with a genetic connection and into the general population began with the autism spectrum quotient, which measures autistic traits as a continuous dimension. Some studies of self-rated subclinical autistic traits have found a relationship with objective markers highlighted in studies of diagnosed autism. For example, higher subclinical autism spectrum quotient scores have predicted a lower performance on tests of social cognition and executive function in the general population who are not autistic. While it should be borne in mind that the same behaviour can have different underpinnings, it does appear that at a behavioural level at least, one can be a bit autistic. That's debatable. Very debatable indeed, but that shows that obviously, the behavioural symptoms of autism, take any behaviour, autistic behaviour, can be found in the general population at a behavioural level on a dimension. At a genetic level too, it appears that genetic influences of subclinical traits overlap with those in diagnosed autism. For the majority, genetics of autism is just like the genetics of height. Autism is the result of many common genetic variants, each of a minuscule effect. We all carry many of these variants, but only in a minority of autistic people are rare genetic mutations relevant, and even in these cases, genetic background in terms of common variants remains relevant. Polygenetic scores, which add up weighted effects of hundreds of thousands of common variants, are found to be elevated even in families whose autistic child shows a de novo genetic mutation. Behaviourally, genetically and neuroanatomically, a dimensional characterisation appears warranted. Even in the brain, it shows, this is it's quantitative or dimensional. There's no fixed kind of divide between an autistic and non-autistic, even in the level of the brain. But again, the question arises, is there a cognitive, can autism be distinguished on a cognitive level? So behaviourally, anatomically, and genetically, autism can be seen to be dimensional. Continuous. But can you argue for a qualitative, distinct categorisation on the cognitive level? That's the question. As cognitively may present a qualitative difference in some respects and not in others. So the theory of mind deficit account is posited as a qualitative difference, but other cognitive characteristics may fit a more dimensional approach. For example, executive dysfunction. Executive dysfunction varies tremendously in the general population. So that can be seen as more quantitative or dimensional. A weak central coherence, that's to say the propensity to look at details as opposed to wholes, could also be seen as a quantitative difference in detail-focused cognitive style. The same can apply to sensory. So this is a suggestion here that maybe the fundamental qualitative distinct difference that marks autism as a clinical construct say from as a clinical category, could be seen to be a qualitative distinction in theory of mind. That autistic people have an impaired theory of mind, and is that what makes autism distinct? But I would argue that potentially theory of mind is also quantitative. You know, I would say, well, maybe in the general population there are degrees of theory of mind. So can that also be dimensional? That's a question. The shift to search instead for stratification biomarkers, so markers that might predict differences in, e.g., prognosis within groups of autistics, as opposed to qualitatively distinct diagnostic biomarkers distinguishing autism from non-autism that have not been found. So that's the other question here. Okay, I'm actually going to stop this video now because this is quite a long article and I don't want to rush it and I want to come back. So I'm going to stop this, but do let me know what you think. Okay, so thank you for watching.